The conference room adjoining room 412 at Callahan Neurological Institute held 4 people and one unsigned document, a withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment directive waiting on the table for Claire Whitfield's signature. Her father, Nathaniel Whitfield, lay 2 doors down, unresponsive for 5 months since the accident. His care team unanimous that further intervention offered no realistic path forward. Claire's pen was an inch from the paper when a small voice down the hallway began humming, off-key and unhurried, a tune that made the monitor in Nathaniel's room chirp with an alert none of his nurses had heard in 11 weeks. Nathaniel, 58, had founded a logistics and shipping conglomerate that grew from a single leased warehouse in 1994 into a company valued at $1.9 billion by the time of his accident. A single vehicle crash on a rain-slicked coastal highway exactly 3 years to the day after his wife, Margaret's death from ovarian cancer. He'd spent those 3 years running the company from a corner office 62 floors up, eating dinner alone at his desk more nights than not, according to his longtime assistant, who estimated he'd taken fewer than 20 personal days in the 36 months since Margaret died. Nathaniel's injuries left him in a coma for 19 days, then reclassified after 11 weeks of no meaningful response as a persistent vegetative state, a diagnosis distinct from brain death, meaning his brainstem still regulated basic functions, but showing no detectable evidence of awareness. His care, provided through a specialized long-term unit, cost $28,000 a month, a figure his estate could sustain indefinitely, though his medical team gently, repeatedly, explained that money couldn't purchase the one thing that mattered, a documented case of meaningful recovery from this specific diagnosis, past the 6-month mark, was statistically exceedingly rare. Claire, 31, was Nathaniel's only child, an architect who'd spent much of her 20s in a strained, mostly long-distance relationship with her father following her parents' brief 2-year separation when she was 14, a rift that had partially healed by the time Margaret died, but never fully. She'd flown in from Chicago the day of the accident and hadn't returned home since, taking unpaid leave from her firm for 5 months, wrestling nightly with a decision no manual, no matter how many specialists she consulted, could make feel less impossible. Rosa Delgado, 34, had worked as the Whitfield household's housekeeper for 6 years, a job that paid $22 an hour, and had, since Nathaniel's accident, expanded unofficially into helping Claire manage the house she'd otherwise have had no time to maintain. Rosa's regular childcare fell through that particular morning, forcing her to bring her 2-year-old daughter, Valentina, along, under a quiet agreement with Claire that Val would stay contained to the staff kitchen at the hospital's family residence wing while Rosa finished paperwork. Valentina didn't stay in the kitchen. She wandered, as 2-year-olds reliably do, down a hallway toward an open door, humming a tune Rosa had sung to her every night since infancy. A simple, repetitive lullaby with no particular name, learned from Rosa's own grandmother decades earlier. She reached Nathaniel's bedside before anyone caught up to her, put her small hand over his, and kept humming the way toddlers narrate the world to anyone within reach, alive or not. The attending nurse, Deborah Ashford, entered moments later to remove Valentina and found something that made her stop entirely. Nathaniel's EEG monitor, running continuous background measurement per standard protocol, showed a brief but distinct spike in cortical activity, synchronized within seconds of Valentina's hand touching his. It wasn't the first flicker of activity recorded in 5 months, but it was the first one directly correlated with an external stimulus, rather than appearing random, and the timing was impossible for Deborah to dismiss as coincidence alone. Dr. Amara Osi, Nathaniel's lead neurologist, reviewed the readout the next morning with visible caution. A single correlated spike, she explained to Claire, wasn't evidence of consciousness. Isolated cortical activity could occur for reasons unrelated to awareness, and building false hope around one data point was, in her clinical experience, one of the cruelest things a doctor could do to a grieving family. She recommended proceeding with the scheduled care conference as planned. Claire, for the first time in 5 months, asked for 72 hours to think it over instead. With Dr. Osei's reluctant permission, framed clinically as an observational session, not treatment, Rosa brought Valentina back the following afternoon, this time with monitoring equipment specifically calibrated to track the response. Valentina, uninterested in the gravity of the room, hummed the same tune, held Nathaniel's hand the same way. The EEG showed the same spike, this time sustained for 11 seconds rather than 3, alongside a documented faint increase in respiratory rate variability, a secondary marker Dr. Osi admitted she hadn't expected to see paired with the first. After a third and fourth session across the following 9 days, each showing consistent stimulus-correlated activity, Dr. Osi convened a full case review with 2 outside specialists. Their conclusion reclassified Nathaniel's condition from persistent vegetative state to minimally conscious state, a distinct diagnosis with a categorically different prognosis, associated in published outcome data with meaningfully higher rates of partial recovery, particularly when consistent stimulus and family engagement continue. It wasn't a cure. It was, Dr. Osi was careful to stress, a door that had been quietly ajar the whole time, one nobody had found the right key for. Dr. Osi's working theory, presented cautiously and without overstating certainty, centered on familiarity and unstructured repetition. Valentina's humming was unrehearsed, unhurried, and utterly without the clinical formality of scheduled stimulation therapy. Delivered by someone with no awareness, she was supposed to expect a response, and therefore no tension in her voice or touch. Nathaniel's prior stimulation sessions, though clinically sound, had been conducted on a 20-minute rotating schedule by rotating staff, consistent in protocol, but never once by the same unhurried presence twice. Sitting beside her father's bed that week, Claire admitted to Rosa something she hadn't said to anyone, including her own therapist. Part of her had wanted to sign the withdrawal papers not from mercy, but exhaustion. 5 months of a grief with no funeral to close it, and a fear that continuing meant failing at the one decision left that was entirely hers to make correctly. Rosa, listening without judgment, told her plainly, "Wanting rest doesn't make you a bad daughter. It makes you someone who's been standing at his bedside longer than anyone should have to stand alone." Over the following 4 months, Nathaniel's condition progressed gradually, first consistent eye tracking to voice, then, by month 3, a documented ability to squeeze a hand on command roughly 60% of trials, and finally, in the 5th month, after Valentina's first visit, 3 spoken words during a supervised session. "Where is Claire?" His recovery remained, per Dr. Osei's formal notes, partial and incomplete, with ongoing cognitive and motor rehabilitation expected to continue for years, not a triumphant full return to the man he'd been before the crash. Nathaniel, communicating haltingly through a combination of speech and assistive technology by the following year, personally directed the creation of a $14 million research grant at Callahan Neurological Institute, studying family and caregiver-led stimulation protocols for minimally conscious patients, a field that, per the Institute's own prior data, received less than 3% of comparable federal funding allocated to earlier-stage coma research. He also established a full college trust fund for Valentina and formally raised Rosa's role to household operations manager at nearly double her prior wage, a title change she initially resisted, insisting she'd only been humming to her daughter, not performing a miracle. Nathaniel would later tell Claire, in one of his early full sentences months into his recovery, that he didn't remember the accident or the coma or the 11 weeks that led to his reclassification. What he remembered, faintly, imperfectly, but distinctly, was warmth on his hand and a tune he couldn't name, but somehow already knew. The lesson isn't that a toddler's humming defied medicine. It's that recovery, when it comes at all, rarely announces itself with certainty. It arrives quietly, correlated with nothing more extraordinary than someone showing up, unhurried and unafraid, long enough for a door already ajar to finally be noticed.